Okay, welcome back to another wonderful Tech Mahindra live session. And today we are going to talk about Digital Rupee, term that many of us, like I say, the Aam Janta, is still intrigued by what it is and trying to understand the effect of the same. We all hear about blockchain and all the stuff, and it's related to cryptocurrency and all the stuff, right? But there's still some haziness around this term, and that is where we thought that we bring in some experts to help us delve into this little more, help us understand it more in terms of what could be the impact of such a currency from a central bank, and what would be the impact on the banks themselves, right? Because if there's no physical currency, what are they going to lend, and all those nitty-gritties of say a central bank currency. So with me today I have three eminent panelists, someone who are experts in their own rights around this topic. So I'm glad to welcome Ashutosh Sharma from Forrester, Nikhil Alulkar, who is the SVP and business head from India at Tech Mahindra, and Rajesh, right? And he is the payments expert for us and heads the payments center of excellence at Tech Mahindra. So before I start the Q&A, let me just have them introduce themselves quickly, and then we did start into the questions. Ashutosh?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Malhar. This is Ashutosh Sharma. I am a part of Forrester Research, look after Forrester Research in India, based out of India. Lee, have been covering tech topics and things related to tech for a long time now. So, very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Nikhil?
Thank you, Malhar and Ashutosh. Hi, team. My name is Nikhil Alulkar, and I lead the Tech Mahindra India business. Very glad to be here discussing a very exciting topic today.
Absolutely. We are equally excited. Rajesh?
Hi Malhar. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here talking to everybody on payments of the future. It's a lot of exciting times for us with a lot of changes coming in. We're going to talk about this today. I lead the payments practice for Tech Mahindra globally, and I have 23 years of experience around payments and the associated satellite systems and spaces. So excited to be here to talk about this topic. Over to you, Malhar.
Fantastic, fantastic. And to all the audience, keep your questions flowing in. So we will be eager to take a few questions from the audience and ask the experts. Trust me, they have enough information for all of us to consume today. So let me start with Ashutosh first, and let us just try to understand what is this entire thing called digital rupee, digital currency, what we also call it central bank digital currency, CBDC, etc. And the relationship, right? I know there's a distant relationship of cryptocurrency also there. So, Ashutosh, why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
Sure, Malhar. Yeah, I mean, it's a very basic question that all of us kind of struggle with when we first come to terms with this new terminology. And CBDC has been in talks or at least people have been talking about it for the last few years now, and it's sort of in a way, reaction of the governments to all this crypto craze that we have been seeing, and crypto, obviously has been around for much longer, and priorly, as you all know, so without getting into the details of bitcoins and whatnot, and all the craze that it has brought. But what we realize, or the governments across the globe realize, that there's a lot of issues with respect to having their citizens, having their people put a lot of money in cryptos and have their transaction carried out through them, and whether it's related to them simply being very, very speculative, even though crypto fanatics won't say that. But primarily, in our opinion, it's cryptos are liked by either speculators or libertarians who basically have something against the regulations. So they would say, hey, keep it deregulated and keep it out of the touch of the government and all that. But governments obviously don't like that. They want to have something which is much more controlled, and something which can which is much more stable. So in very simple terms, CBDC is basically a digital form of the fiat currency that's issued by the central bank of the country. And as of today, more than 90 odd countries are basically experimenting or piloting or even launching some of that. And and some of them, of course, thinking about it. India is basically, I would say, somewhere in the middle with respect to its preparation, with respect to its the news that our honorable finance minister, she announced during the budget speech that we will be launching, or India will be launching crypto, or the CBDC in 22 23 time frame. And one of the key things basically uh, that CBDC makes CBDC different from crypto is, of course, cryptos are issued by the private parties who have their own sort of vested interests, and they have their own mechanism, that they kind of follow to ensure it follows the characteristics of a typical money that you should have, right? It should be basically somewhat limited in circulation. It should hold some value, things like that. Whereas when it comes to CBDC, whether it's digital rupee or something else, they're backed by the central government. And if you know, for example, just looking at rupee for that matter, as per our RBI, I think Act of 1933 or 34, I think 33, 34, it says that rupee is something that's going to be backed with gold, government security, and foreign security assets. Whereas cryptos, on the other hand, don't have that sort of backing. Though we have something called stable coins and all, which are slightly different, but still nothing compared to something which is backed by the central bank of a country. So that's just one major difference. But if you look at many other things, cryptos by definition are likely to be, or not by definition, by design, are likely to be built on something like a distributed ledger platform, whereas CBDC don't have to. I mean, if it's kind of like, for example, China launched their CBDC late last year. It doesn't run on blockchain, while India is saying that they will use blockchain and some other technologies, but we really don't know what exactly it'll pan out as. So that's one. And then the fact that CBDCs are likely to be much less volatile, they are much less anonymous, and they'll obviously come with fewer risk. And more importantly, if you look at it from a crypto perspective, there are a lot of other issues as well with respect to the environmental impact, the risk that they pose to the financial sector of any country. So there are a lot of sort of changes that we are seeing, a lot of from the government policy perspective, which are there to kind of deter the spread of crypto among the population. So CBDC is sort of a reaction to that, is how I'll summarize that.
Okay, fantastic. So if I have to take couple of takeaways from what you just mentioned, right? It is India is still somewhere in the middle, and the like countries like China have kind of introduced. So if I have to segue to the next question, and because India is somewhere in the middle, right? Let me go to Nikhil and ask about what do you see that perspective in India happening, right? Where is India on that front? While as Ashutosh said, it's somewhere in middle, but what it is exactly, and what after the finance minister's announcement, what changes do you see happening there?
Sure. So, Malhar, I want to start with two of my experiences in last 5 years. The first experience really goes 4.5 years back. I had planned a vacation of my family to northern part of India, and as we landed in Delhi, we were completely taken aback by the news that demonetization has happened.
No.
And over next 2 3 days, we somehow managed with cash, credit cards, and I used to use some e-wallet at that time. It wasn't really used that widely in Delhi, but we somehow managed our trip, be it at restaurants, be it at tourist spots. Little bit struggle, but that fueled the digital transformation, the major digital transformation across the world. And what we see is in last 5 years, all of us have almost stopped using cash for routine purposes as consumers. My second story is just 2 weeks back. I was in a remote seashore of India doing scuba and some surfing activities. And let me tell you, be it to the boatman, be it to the restaurant, be it at paying a normal restaurant, I didn't use cash at all. So those are my two experiences in last 5 years, from using complete cash to moving to e-wallet, and what a phenomenal digital transformation in India fueled by 4G, fueled by internet and mobility. And what I feel is, with the recent announcement of CBDC, I think we are going to see the third wave now coming in India. As you all are aware that the Honorable Finance Minister just announced the CBDC. And I don't think it's a new thing to the world. World over, this has been discussed for a very long. And in last couple of years, the respectable organizations are like RBI and industry bodies actually have been thinking how does India launch? And here I completely concur with Ashutosh. Uh, Stop using cryptocurrency, but launch India's own digital currency. And across the globe, when banks have launched so many their own digital currency, how does India launch it? How can India really do a proof of concept? Can we do pilots in the world? And while doing this, there are a lot of ramification in India. I'm sure that everybody is really thinking about how do these pilots be done, what in all places that we have to look for, what's going to be the scope, should India launch it or should RBI really launch it only in consumer sector or in wholesale payments? The ledger, which is going to be the backbone, will it be centralized? Will it be distributed? The security, will it be token based or will it be account based? And will the overall architecture, because this CBDC is going to be used across India with billions of people, will it be a distributed or a centralized architecture? But nutshell, like I believed last two transmission fueled the Indian economy, the CBDC by RBI is actually going to be a big boost to Indian digital economy. And it will also lead to a more efficient and cheaper currency management system is what I feel. The announcement is they will launch it in a year's time. And we are very keenly observing as a tech firm, how do we participate with the regulator, with the banks, and give this a very minimal disruptive impact to Indian economy.
Fantastic. And again, so uh, if I have the key takeaway, right, and before I segue to Rajesh, right, it's the third wave of transformation that we could be witnessing with CBDCs, and and then you brought in the technology element of it, right? What can be the distribution, how the pilots will happen around the rollout of CBDC. So that is where I want to bring in Rajesh to chime in from his perspective on the technology front. So how does this distribution, how does he foresee the entire distribution happening, right? and and also you rightly mentioned the entire e-wallet ecosystem. Do you think some of those will be leveraged as the issuance and distribution of CBDC starts up?
Yeah, thanks, Malhar. So, I mean, just taking off from where Nikhil sort of left off, right? He called this interestingly the third wave. But if you look at the progression in which, sort of India, the payment systems that's driven by both NPCI and RBI together is sort of moving, right? So you have the Vajra platform that actually was announced a year or so back, which was blockchain-based clearing and settlement at the back end. Recently, there was e-rupee that was sort of announced, which sort of helps you do electronic transactions backed by the banks. The way you storing money and so on, right? So there is in the commercial sector, of course. So there has been a very streamlined and logical progression towards CBDC. Nick, Ashutosh did touch upon the aspect of cryptocurrency, which is pretty much unregulated versus sort of a take on stable coin, which is centrally backed, right? So while governments do have this problem with the kind of cryptocurrencies that are actually mushrooming in different parts of the globe, the trades that are happening. A very streamlined way in which to take CBDC. I think the RBI and NPCA have laid the foundation stones, both from a technology standpoint and also from the set of digital use cases that have actually come in over a period of time in the last 3 to 5 years that we're seeing UPI 2.0 and so on, right? So how will CBDC be issued? What will the models look like, right? So you talked about what will happen to the ecosystem. Now there are two ways we are looking at typically the cryptocurrency being issued, right? So one is basically looking at it purely like a deposit account with a central bank. It's called an account-based model. So very simply put, you have the central bank issuing CBDC currency, but it has a very strong oversight. CBDC is backed, and you have literally like looking at it as an account with the central bank, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Of course, how it will work with the current ecosystem will be more like the servicing, the technical maintenance of it could be delegated to many third parties. In the context of India, you could look at like large private and public service sector banks coming in as the commercial banks, servicing this whole thing as those third parties, and there could be indirect participants flowing down of it and so on, right? So that's one model of it. The second model of it is a token-based model. We're looking at a digital token-based currency, which is again, it brings the technology flavor that we were talking about earlier of the distributed ledger. So you will be looking at an equivalent of a decentralized way without a central ledger, and offers the same kind of anonymity. So if you want to take a equivalent of how it will look like, is basically the electronic version of the currency notes that you hold in the hand, right? So you don't know, the central bank doesn't know who, RBI doesn't know who holds the money, who's doing the transactions, and so on and so forth, right? Complete anonymity. But the way we are sort of looking at it, right, the driving factors for India to have a CBDC, right? So there are 3 or 4 things that I'm looking at it. One is the Honorable Finance Minister did talk about efficiency and the cost aspects of it. So definitely reducing the cost of carry of the cash. The second aspect of it is in terms of broadly, if you look at it, there's been like why do I have to support cryptocurrency? And there's been like laws around like stopping it and so on. So we're looking at definitely some kind of a regulatory oversight or a grip on the currency issuance. And third is definitely financial inclusion, right? So the RBI has been like behind, the central government has been behind financial inclusion for quite a long time. So that will definitely be one of those factors. And obviously, from a broad ecosystem perspective, it's not going to disintermediate the current the bank setup and so on. And we definitely are looking at a coexistence of CBDC and cash. So these are the core aspects of how we believe the CBDC will function, both from a macroeconomic perspective, how will it influence and so on, and also how will the technology back this, right? So it's going to be dependent on some of these 4 or 5 key drivers. So that's our perspective as it stands.
Fantastic. I couldn't have asked for a more detailed answer to that question, and very well put. So before I segue into the next question, there is an interesting question that kind of aligned to what I wanted to ask next, right? And this question comes from an audience. So let me put that on the screen for you, right? So again, if I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. So Akpaka is asking, CBDC is rolled out in many countries. Adoption is one thing. Do you think there will be enough adoption because we have higher amount of people who don't understand how it works? Anyone who wants to pick this up?
I'll take that first
Yeah,
and
sure.
let Rajesh and Ashutosh chime in. I think, in my opinion, the main currency will remain, but the digital currency will augment for particular use cases. And one use case what I can think of in India is when Government of India launches a lot of subsidiaries, especially let's say farming subsidiaries, and it wants to make sure that the subsidiary given is utilized for the purpose that it was given. A CBDC central bank issued digital currency will play a phenomenal role and make sure that the subsidy given is what it is used for, right? I could think of that as one popular use case that government can think of to start with.
Thank you. Ashutosh,
So,
Rajesh, yeah.
yeah, if I were to ask in terms of adoption, whether it'll be higher because maybe there's a typo. I think maybe he wants to say we will higher number of people who understand how it works. So the thing is like this, each country has a slightly different dynamic, right? And each country has slightly different drivers as to why they are going for CBDC. For example, the China, the reason why they went for CBDC is because they did not have a UPI moment like we had in India, and there was a duopoly that existed, and pretty much they were controlling everything from the data and that they were collecting on the payment themselves, and the fact that because of them completely online and driven through smartphones, and you needed to have bank account, etc. But financial inclusion is still a major issue in China. They needed some solution for that. Whereas in a country like India, the drivers should be different. We have done pretty well when it comes to financial inclusion. We have done pretty well actually in terms of the digital payments. So UPI has been, as you all know, a game changer. So the amount of digital transactions that are happening because of UPI are significantly high. I think a reason for in India to grow adoption of the digital rupee or CBDC would be primarily not by the in my opinion, not by the rural masses. It probably might be limited to initially certain tier ones, tier twos, basically people who are more familiar with it. So in a way, I kind of align with what the gentleman asked. But at the same time, it's also stopping people from getting into speculative asset classes. There's a significant amount of money that was going into that, and government wants to provide sort of a separate mechanism for people to kind of come to this, and then allowing them to make payments somewhat anonymously. For example, even in China, which is so well controlled, anything under 2,000 renminbi actually is anonymous. You don't have to announce yourself. Just with the mobile phone, you can actually collect that money and pay. So likewise, it will allow some sort of a experience of a cash sort of transaction as well. So if you have, for example, a nephew who is asking or bugging you for money for a date, you can actually give money without telling his dad, right? So that sort of a thing, or maybe much more interesting use cases, I believe. But the point is, there's a bit of anonymity it's provided, but ultimately it provides aspiration to a certain set of users who are looking for newer experiences which can be built on top of something like this. So there's a lot of aspirations that in a country like India. But if you look at some other countries, I mean, El Salvador, not that they have CBDC, but they actually decided to go peg everything on blockchain, on Bitcoin or Ethereum, one of those. And they're struggling in the process in certain ways. But it's not a CBDC implementation though. But I still wanted to bring them up here in terms of their experience of using a sort of crypto to run the economy. Very volatile, very sort of there are a lot of issues. The Bitcoin fell down, I think 44% or whatever in a short time frame. That kind of brought their the forex reserve by a significant amount. So that's obviously governments can't go for something like that. They need something like a CBDC, which is much more stable, backed by. So there are various reasons why people would adopt, I think, but the reasons will vary by the country, is what I should say.
Fantastic. Rajesh, do you have a take, or you want me to go through the question?
I think it's a very interesting perspective that Ashutosh sort of brought up, right? Which there is a context to CBDC in each country. So if you've seen some of those that have actually gone live, right? Like you have the Sand Dollar in the Bahamas, right? They had a fantastic, backstory to this, context to this whole thing, right? So they were actually having long spells of where the banks were not able to support the cash carried across. It's an archipelago, this like a ton of islands that you'll have to carry the cash across. There's frequent storms and cyclones. So for them it makes sense to sort of move to a CBDC kind of a model where it is pretty much driven by a distributed ledger kind of a system. So it sort of justifies a lot of these cases, and I think every country has to sort of look at what is their use case in it. Like in the Nordics, the adoption of cash, right, is far and few. Like there's about 2% of the populace that actually uses the physical cash, and probably a big percentage of that is people entering the country and so on, right, as tourists. So in those cases, there is again a case for something like a CBDC. I'm not saying that every country should have a case, but I think it is very important that the RBA and NPCI, and of course I'm sure they will be sort of looking at what best suits this in the context of so much of success that we've had in digital payments, and how is CBDC going to give a buoy to what's already happening in the digital payment space.
Fantastic. So that brings me to the question, and it also aligns well to what you just mentioned in terms of what are the use cases. And India typically, what or the use cases you mentioned was about the consumer part of the thing. But in India, there is this huge network of merchants, retail users, etc. What do you think will be an impact on that side of business, Rajesh?
Um, Look, the key thing is to leverage what already has happened. I think payments is it's more driven through behavior. It's more of a habit thing, right? So we are used to UPI. We used to paying through mobile phones, QR code, and so on. There is going to be a significant amount of coexistence, both from a cash perspective as well as from a digital payments perspective, right? So if I were a merchant, I wouldn't sort of want like too many changes happening to me when I'm accepting CBDC. So it will be fairly easier for me to use the same set of like QR code based payments, or UPI based push pull payments and so on, right? So collections and so on. So it becomes easier to sort of leverage this existing ecosystem and introduce CBDC. That said, probably from where we are going to start, right, is again, it's purely the way we understand this is to look at it more from the perspective of specialized use cases around CBDCs. Nikhil spoke about agriculture subsidies, right? So we are going to look at certain very focused use cases that are going to center around government-driven initiatives. Definitely, there'll be retail-based initiatives which will sort of tie into, say, for example, loyalty and so on and so forth. So there is going to be a lot of dependence on the existing infrastructure. A lot of these use cases will drive around those kind of existing behaviors, if I may.
Okay, fantastic. So moving to Ashutosh, right? And because this one, because Rajesh just spoke about some of the implementation part of the things, right? With uh, QR code based implementation or UPI based. What do you think? Some because you have this global perspective from Forrester, where you research about a lot of those implementations, right? What are some of those technology imperatives that we need to be mindful of, right, while the implementation is happening across the board?
Right, and if you look at from CBDC in India perspective, there's a lot of unknowns at the moment, right? While there are a couple of statements that have come, obviously, Honorable Finance Minister, she announced that it'll be based on blockchain and some other technologies. But then there was another, I think, clarification that came from one of the RBI officer as well as to a little bit with more details. But there are a lot of unknowns with respect to how this is going to be structured. But if you were to look at the lessons that exist outside, there are a couple of ways. First of all, I mean, Rajesh did allude that in one of the previous comment as to how you can distribute this, right? So, for example, we don't fully know at the moment in India whether it's going to be completely owned by the central government. But RBI, will it be token based? Will it be account based? We don't know that for that. But that will determine how things get built out in future. Also, we don't know, for example, what type of issuance and distribution architecture we're going to have. Will the RBI be giving this money directly to individuals, or will there be banks involved in the distribution? If you look at the China, actually it's the banks and a couple of the leading tech players who are basically involved in the distribution. But depending on which architecture you choose, and then the third question that we don't know at the moment is whether it's for both retail and wholesale, right? Because those are the two different, completely distinct use cases. And if it's blockchain based, how are you going to do the retail? Because blockchain based technologies don't really lend themselves very well for retail payments, because if you know a Bitcoin, it is like what, 6-7 transactions per second. Ethereum is slightly better at around 20 or something, might have increased a little bit. And then they are trying to, those technologies are trying to figure out some sort of a band-aids to make it a little bit more workable for retail payments, so that the problem is not solved. So how do we need to know a little bit more technology details as the government, as it announces and clarifies, then we'll have a much better sense of where exactly, how it's going to land. But in the absence of that, what we can say, there is still lots of industry participants who will have a role to play with respect to uh, uh, and their role will be determined by, of course, but what sort of architecture we come up with and what sort of technologies we select. But you can imagine, for example, retailers will have to figure out in China's case, for example, JD.com worked with People's Bank of China, which is RBI's equivalent there, to create wallets for millions of their people, and then they can have a direct e-commerce transaction pretty much on the platform. So likewise, you can imagine something similar happening here. Maybe the PSPs that we created for UPI will have a role to play in terms of creating some sort of a mechanism through which the payment can happen. Again, if it's token based, then how is the ownership of token changing versus how is the settlement happening, and things like that. There could be technologies that need to be built. Then there's another major another major question that actually would happen with around offline payments, because if you're introducing CBDC as a substitute for cash, and cash enables lots of offline transactions where you do not have connectivity or do not have instant sort of settlement between buyer and the pay and the payer, or sorry, buyer and the merchant. So how does that happen? There's a lot of technologies that needs to be built, for example, for enabling offline payment, things such as maybe there's some sort of a card that you would have which will load some of your coins and you'll exchange, and ultimately when your connectivity it gets settled down. So there's a entire value chain that exists between the final user, which is you and I, who will be holding the money, and all the way to RBI, and in between intermediaries, and all of them will have some role to play as things become more clear with respect to how this is going to be designed and architected and delivered, and what sort of use case government is planning to solve.
Fantastic. So before I go to Nikhil, and I know there's a very nice question that I could think of, because end of the day, being the India head, his focus would be on Danda Kahan hai, right? So before I come to that question, right, there is a nice question from an audience. I don't know if you'll be able to relate to it, but Akanksha has asked, what would an Indian CBDC be pegged to Indian rupee as well as USDT and USDC? Any thoughts on that?
It's announced to be pegged to Indian rupees, and by default, then in a way it will be pegged to the US dollars, because whatever the exchange rate that exists between Indian rupees and US dollars will be applicable to that as well. In fact, there's an interesting experimentation that's happening, which is done between China, UAE, Bank of Thailand, Hong Kong. So there are 4 or 5 countries that came up. They build this MCBDT bridge, where they are looking at how can they exchange, they create their own CBDCs, and how can they kind of do cross-border payments as well. Since she mentioned USDT, which I'm assuming is US digital currency, you would expect something like that happening there as well.
Okay, fantastic. Nikhil, Rajesh, do you have a take on it, or you are okay to move to the next one? So,
Yeah, I think Ashu's pretty much covered the aspect of cross-border payments and pegging against what, right? The This another dimension to the same question is um is there going to be interest on on the CBDC as well, right? So it's another take on the question in a different sense of it. From that perspective, I think from a macroeconomic perspective, the way we are understanding from the experts is that there wouldn't be an interest rate for economies that are fairly stable from that perspective, but an interesting variation of that is to sort of look at countries where hoarding happens, right? So can there be a negative interest rate on holding of CBDC, for example, right? So there are different perspectives around how I can spend, right? So cross-border payments being one. The second is, does CBDC even have that earning power?
Okay.
So before you move
Accidentally,
on,
you answered one question. Actually, someone from audience had asked it. Yes, sure,
yeah,
Ashutosh,
before you
please.
move on, Malhar, I want to give one more clarification in case it wasn't very clear. So when I was talking about the USDTs and USDCs, basically, that's a USD backed coin. One thing which I'm not sure at the moment, while it will be pegged to USD and the exchange rate should apply, but I really don't know whether it's something the government will allow. So don't. I'm not saying that you would be able to exchange CBDC with that stable coin. That I don't know at the moment, but the if it was, I mean, the pegging would be obviously in relation to the rupees that the currency that we have.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I'll go back to my question and so to Nikhil, right? Danda kahan hai, right? So do you think, right? Say entire because say between Rajesh and Ashutosh, we talked about the global implementations and everything. End of the day, we are a tech company, right? So as a tech organization, where do you think this entire thing, what firms or what organizations like us can be playing a role in this entire ecosystem, and what do you see for, or what do you foresee brands, organizations like TechM playing a role in that entire system?
Sure, Malhar. The name itself, digital currency, will have a huge play for technology. To me, rather, this whole initiative is backed, enabled, and implemented by technology. And that's going to be, technology will play a role in every step and aspect of CBDC. So, in my opinion, there are 5 places a tech firm like us or others can play a huge role in enabling this for the country. The first is really making it available. That means we will enable the backend infrastructure. That means high speed internet, high speed telecommunication. That's one aspect totally on the backend, apart from the core technology like blockchain or any other ledger. The second is really there will be a lot of modernization and transformation on the core banking and payment systems of the bank's banking system itself. So that's the second aspect where tech firms can have a huge role. The third is really when a currency like this being launched, there'll be a lot of regulatory requirements from RBI or other similar institutions. So reporting is going to be a very key aspect to maintain transparency. We have seen recently, be it wallets or anything digital, is highly susceptible with cyber attacks. So the tech firm, it becomes highly imperative to build a very resilient infrastructure. So maybe certain parts on cloud to bring in the elastic and scale, but certain things only maintaining on premise. So that's sort of a hybrid infrastructure. And the last is really maintaining all of this online 24 bar 7 for a scale like India. The way we have seen is the way e-payments had to work across India, the CBDC fall to work, be it the ledger, be it the network, be it the applications, core banking, payments, and cybersecurity, all of that have to come together. And a company like Tech Mahindra or others can actually have a huge significant play in making all of this real.
Fantastic. And as a tech organization, I think we should be happy about this, right? Given all the things happening around. So I think we still have 5 minutes, and before we wrap up, there is one audience question again that has come up. If you want to pick it up, this is from Mukul Kashyap. is saying, why do you think that making Indian digital currency will do any good in the current market? As taxation is implemented, why will people still invest in it? Any thoughts?
So I
It's
don't.
rather long. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll go first. I don't think you should sort of look at this as an investment instrument. I'm looking at it more from a macroeconomic tool that will sort of ease things a lot, not just for the government and the Reserve Bank, but more so for Aam Janta and corporates to do payment transactions much easier. There's a lot of talk around technology and things like that. But if you look at some of the leverage that we can use from technology, there's smart contracts that can actually come in from a crypto DLT kind of technology, which can mean a lot of things for bankers and for people who are doing these kind of transactions as a part of the overall supply chain itself, right? So some of those things is basically what comes to my mind more than trying to sort of equate this to something like a cryptocurrency, like a Bitcoin and equivalents, right? So that's my primary my first reaction to this question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
just to add to that, I completely agree. It's not an investment. It's obviously not a substitute for whatever you were doing with Bitcoin and other coins that were out there. So, first of all, that's one thing. Second thing is, if you look at from the value perspective, of course, there's a lot of value the government has. It can save a lot of money and expenses rather that are required in running physical cash currency notes. Basically, this is just huge amount of expenditure government RBI incurs in running that. So obviously, it's a lot of incentive for government to keep it digital. Yeah, that's one. Number two, I think if you look at it just from depending on the architecture, if it's implemented well. Think of today's payment right, so any payment transaction that you make, as you and I rather make as a credit card, for example, we believe that payment happen instantaneously, but there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and merchants actually get that money many days after the payment transactions actually happen. But with something like this, that could be instantaneous. So there's a lot of incentives for merchants, probably, if they can see a payment made on a CBDC, which is directly going into their account, or they're getting those whatever ownership of those tokens very quickly, and that's a big value for them. So likewise, there are lot of other benefits you should see in the currency that's provided by the RBI, and the way it's going to smoothen a lot of other transactions, even like the smart contract that Rajesh just talked about. At a small level, it's going to be so much safer to have, if that functionality is also launched along with the CBDC in India, so much safer to get into that sort of those transactions. So there are various allied benefits that are going to come. Obviously, it's by not any stretch of imagination, it's not a speculative or for that matter any kind of investment class, unless you want to invest in rupee, which in itself is as a currency. Then you can do it elsewhere. It doesn't have to be CBDC.
Okay, fantastic. So allow me to ask one last question, and this is from Akanksha again. So her follow-up question, and I think some part of it you alluded to it, but will CBDC overtake UPI?
So
It's a very tricky question. Yeah, I know.
it's the way I look at it, right? It's UPA uses at the back of it fiat currency. So an easy way to sort of look at UPI being more of a vehicle to transport CBDC rather than, or a network to this obviously IMPS underneath it. So sort of makes it's more like the road and the bus, right? So we are now launching a different kind of a bus on probably the existing road, and as we go along, there might be better infrastructure or improvements coming into UPI as a result of CBDC or servicing CBDC. That's the way I'll look at it, rather than looking at it as a competition.
Perfect.
Yep,
Super.
very well said.
So before we wrap up again, so some final comments from all the speakers, right? Are we ready for digital rupee? What could be some of those challenges? Ashutosh?
Right, and yeah, that's a tough one. Are we ready for it? I think the devil is in the details, as I said at the outset. We really don't know how it's gonna be launched. What are the details? But from the overall, the level of digitization that we are seeing in the country and the digital adoption, if anything such as UPI growth is an indication, then I would expect a lot of adoption for something like this, because it obviously is going to simplify various use cases which today, for example, are complicated because of the presence of various providers. However, if we end up implementing an architecture which simply replaces those payment providers or those the intermediaries, then all bets are off. But I'm assuming that won't be the case. So uh, I'm very optimistic about it. There are obviously challenges with respect to the unknowns that we have and what sort of technology implementation, and like I said, things such as how it's going to solve maybe the cross-border payments, how it's going to solve the offline payments. A lot of those things need to be solved, but at the outset, and of course the education and the fraud possibilities that exist, so we need to be aware of that. I mean, there's a lot of jamtara type of situation you can expect with this as well. So yeah, you just have to be, we have to be watchful and see how the space evolves in the future.
Absolutely. Nikhil, over to you. Final comments. Are we ready?
I think we are getting ready. As I've said, we have seen two transformations. The third transformation, we are definitely getting ready. The recent announcement by Honorable Finance Minister or RBI looking at it, the tech companies coming together, I'm sure we will have a smooth launch in the time to come.
Hmm. Absolutely. And Rajesh, from a thought leadership, center of excellence perspective, are we ready from that side of the things as well?
See, instead of asking the question, are we ready? I think it's more about us getting ready about it. So, two things that excite me about something that comes in new is interoperability. There's a lot of talk on interoperability in the last couple of years, 3 4 years, so to say. So, I think it's going to bring in a completely new dimension for cross-border payments and things like that, which we spoke about, right? So there are going to be some interesting things happening in that space. And the second area is sort of looking at data, right? So with sort of fight against cash, right? So you have like you're going to fight against insurmountable amount of data. So of course, there's going to be new cases of fraud and different ways of thinking of beating the system and so on. But more importantly, I think it gives a lot more insights into the way people do transaction, and how we can look at new products, new dimensions based on the data that's going to come in because of this digital transformation or digital product that's going to come in, right? So that's the way I sort of look at it.
Thank you so much, and I couldn't have had a better conversation than this, right? The dawn of the new era of banking or payment system. I think it's still an early dawn. There's a lot of things that needs to be taken care of, as Ashutosh mentioned, right? There are a couple of directives from government, but we need to see what is happening. Nikhil mentioned around the same thing, that yes, as a technology company, we are ready. Let us see how the entire system shapes up. And I am sure Rajesh is pretty gung ho on the same things, right? So thank you to all the speakers. Lovely conversations, lovely audience as well, because there are so many questions, and I think we tried to answer a few of them, but there are still a lot more, and unfortunately we cannot take it up. But do keep pushing your questions. There will be a wrap up blog that will be published after this event, so we will try to answer some of those questions in the blog as well. So keep an eye for that. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here, being part of TechM Live. We will bring up another interesting session soon. So thank you, and thanks Ashutosh, Nikhil, Rajesh again. Lovely
Thanks.
insights.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.